Welcome to the Set to Lead podcast, the online mentoring platform for emerging and current leaders. My name is Marianne Samdi, leadership coach and talent development expert, and I will be your host.
Hi, JG. How are you?
Hi, Marianne. I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here. I know today we're talking about how women can't achieve workplace equality alone, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And I know you have this invitation for men that you say they've been waiting for. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me, and I'd love to talk about it. The work that I do, it's really around this idea of what I call this hidden demographic of men, and I talk about it in my book and in the programs that I do. And the idea of the hidden demographic is this idea that if you put men on a spectrum, you may have some on the far end of the spectrum who aren't interested in change and they're interested in status quo. But as you get towards the middle of the spectrum, you get men who really are decent men who are good leaders, who care about their colleagues, male or female, and who are reasonable people who are interested in leadership and who are forward thinking. And, if you gave them something to sign that said, should women get paid the same for doing the same work? And they would say, of course they should. That's absurd. Yeah. Where do I sign for that? Or I'll check off that box. So they get it and they care, but they're not necessarily activists, and they're not necessarily marching 5 days a week for women's rights. They're doing their lives. And they're not necessarily studying gender equity. They're doing their lives and doing their work, but they want to feel that their colleagues feel that they're treated equally and so on. And they want a positive workplace. And so the thing about it is, though, the current landscape that's out there right now and the current approaches for trying to engage these men, right? I think right now, really, the approach is to cast more of a wide net, which makes sense. Like, okay, we've got to get everybody in the company on board. So we're going to have all the men come in for diversity training and teach them about their unconscious implicit biases and teach them sort of where they're oblivious, and we're going to get them in shape and so on. Mm-hmm. Problem is, a lot of people are really resistant to compulsory diversity training, or, they just resist it and they're not interested in it. But even the guys who are in the hidden demographic, and even the men who are interested and want to support change and aren't afraid of change, it's still an incomplete process, because they essentially, when they're learning about implicit biases and unconscious biases that they hold as men regarding specifically gender, since we're talking about gender here, it's a very important first step, because that thing of, we can't change a behavior unless we are aware of it. So it's really important first step, but it's kind of, what's missing is this huge missing piece, I think, is and this huge untapped potential for change here, which is this idea of what's the compelling step two, the invitation for men to activate the men, to invite men into action from a place of strength that goes beyond saying, like, wow, I didn't realize that when I spoke first at every meeting, you felt unheard, or that I was dominating the meeting. I'm just an open person and I speak first at all the meetings, or something. Like all these different levels of awareness. It's great, again, as a first step. And so it really becomes this, okay, guys, here's a list of things not to do anymore. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And then maybe try to sponsor a woman in your organization, which is great. That's a concrete step. But I think there's a much, much bigger engagement that we could have. And I call it this epic call to men. I think this is really this epic call to men. And it's really, with this approach, it's really saying, may sound a little counterintuitive, but it's really saying, okay, we're not going to worry about everybody, because a lot of folks right now maybe aren't interested in this for whatever reasons. But we're going to go right to the middle. And trust me, that percentage of all men, whether it's 5, 10, 20% of all men, even if it's 5%, it's millions of men across the country. So it's a lot of men. This hidden demographic represents a lot of men, which is why I think it's a huge potential lever for change. And so, the invitation to these guys, this epic call to these men is, hey guys, guess what? You don't have to leave your masculinity at the door, your manhood, in order to come and participate and support women's leadership and gender equity. In fact, bring your strength, bring your ideas of strength as a person, your ideas of strength as a man, bring all that positive masculinity, bring it to the table, and then let's come together and co-lead and co-create with these amazing women leaders. And the reason it's an epic call to men is because we're really talking, even if you're not an activist or, an academic or someone who's interested in studying gender equity, just wherever you are in your space, whether you have a daughter or son or neither or whatever, or grandkids, it's the reverberations of this will be felt for generations. Come in. This is the invitation that men have been waiting for, an invitation to build something. So come and build with us. Let's come and build something together. It's a generative process, which is a very different energy and a very different lack of invitation, which is more like, all right, guys, don't do this, this, and that, and then we'll get back to you next month. So
interesting. So how do you're saying that the inclusion conversations that are going on now are more about awareness and less about action? Yes.
Right. And I'm not saying there aren't any specific, because one specific action, I know that people were encouraging men to not just mentor junior women in their organizations, but to go further and sponsor them, which is a good action step. So that's a concrete thing, but I'm talking about really a holistic, much deeper level of engagement. That's one thing, which is good.
So
but yeah, a lot of it's really
JP,
around.
Give us an example give us an example of a building step. So tell us, how do we take it from the next level, from sponsorship to the next level?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you, Marian. So, for example, I just gave a talk to a group of about 25 vice chairs and vice deans at a major hospital in the U.S. And, it was about half men, half women, pretty much. And really what happened, and what's common is, there's this disconnect. So even the men who were showing up in the room like, tell me what to do. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. There's this sort of this gap, And so after this meeting, I was talking with one of the organizers, and we were talking about, a range of things, and even the guys who were saying like, and one of the core questions that I have at the center of the work that I'm doing with this invitation to these men is this idea of the male leaders asking the women this question of, hey, can you tell me about your leadership style, first of all? I'm really interested in learning about your leadership style, because remember, this is all, the work that I do is all in the context of leadership.
Right.
So this is in the context of leadership and 21st century leadership, moving into the future, and how we get to a new normal regarding equality and equity, and specifically this conversation about gender equity. So, so it's this idea of them asking that question, hey, can you teach me about your leadership style? But then furthermore, I want to really powerfully and actively support your leadership vision. Can you tell me what your leadership vision is and how I can really actively and powerfully support that? So we're literally, this is something that is not being done. That seems so basic, but it's literally not out there. It's not being done, this idea. And even the men in the group kind of struggle with the language, because at first blush, you think, oh yeah, sure. I think I've reached out to so-and-so, or we've had some talks about what she's trying to do. But when it got down to brass tacks about, okay, the actual question, how can I really actively support your leadership vision? First of all, what is your leadership vision? And then somebody in the group said, well, hey, would you ask that same question of a man? And so we talked about that, and we go, yeah, maybe not. And then another woman, physician leader in the group, said, well, yeah, no, because we don't have to ask that question of the men, because the men are already kind of implicitly doing it.
Exactly.
They're already actively support, so we don't have to ask that. So that was like this first step of, can you have that conversation with your female colleague, whether she's senior to you or junior to you, around how can I powerfully support your leadership vision? And then there's a range of things that grow out of that from her and their responses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something as simple as a concrete step as, okay, this may seem stilted or perhaps a first go around or something, but, I've noticed in all of our meetings that such and such always speaks first and has a lot to say every time we meet. And then Dr. Such and such always chimes in second. And there's not a lot of room for the female physicians in the room, it seems like. And this is across sector. You find this in law, medicine, journalism, arts, where it's written about a lot, well documented, this phenomenon of the meeting thing with the men are sort of really out there saying it. And then the woman makes a point about we should try this, doesn't get heard. And then 5 minutes later, the guy says it and it's like, great idea, Tom. And so it's just like, we talked about a concrete thing of just in meetings, in weekly meetings, let's codify this, or let's just say even temporarily, let's try this on for size. Let's try it as an exercise, even though it sounds counterintuitive and maybe forced. Let's just try it and say, okay, we're going to let a couple of the women in the room speak first. We're going to start with our meeting agenda, and we're going to intentionally say, all right, women in the room, go. Lead this meeting, start the meeting, speak first, making that physical space.
Right.
Okay. And that's just a very simple thing to do. But, but on a deeper level, and I told the guys this in the room, part of the deal is you have to be ready. If we're talking, again, not about how to lead every aspect of a hospital or a law firm, but if we're talking about how to make the women in the organization feel that they have an equal voice, if we're going to figure out what is missing and maybe our blind spots and what needs to change, then don't we need to go to the source? Don't we have to ask the women to let us know that and in some ways lead that process? So if we're asking the women to lead that process, then you better be ready to follow that leadership.
So
that's
JP, I think that those are really great suggestions. When you engage in this type of dialogue together from a gender perspective, how do you contend with egos? So
okay, can you elaborate?
There's a lot of ego at work when you're dealing with this type of dynamic. Are there any suggestions that you can provide the community on how to address egos from both sides of the table when you entertain this type of dialogue?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that that's going to be, again, male or female, personality types, power levels, ego, that's bound to come up. But I think, at least in the work I'm doing, we're trying to just find out ahead of time, and filter out. We're trying to get the most powerful lever for change. So really, it's kind of like self-limiting. It's like, here's the invitation. We're going to do this work. And you're in a leadership role in the organization. We're inviting you, male or female. And if you don't think this is viable or you're not interested or have resistance to it or whatever, fine. You don't have to show up. So that's the first level of this approach, is like trying to get the people in the room who are kind of vetted in a way, self-limited, who want to be there to do this work. But even then, you get the people in the room, of course, it's human nature and personalities and ego. But I don't know that that's an exact science in terms of dealing with people's egos as it pertains to this, but
okay.
I do think you have to look at the greater purpose, and that's what I always start with purpose. Well, why are we here in the first place? And I think, I don't know if you're saying ego across the board or male ego or female ego, but I mean, there are definite gender dynamics here, big time. And it's not super rigid, but there are some real general dynamics across this wide swath. Again, because even when you get the men who are really open to this in the room, and one of the female physicians spoke about this at the event the other day I did, which was just, she can say to her colleague who's a female, like, oh yeah, this happened, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, that happens to me like once a day or something, around, you know, how she felt she wasn't heard by a male colleague, or something was dismissive, or she wasn't believed, or something like this. It's such a common experience. And the men have no idea that this is going on. There's such a disconnect in experience. And that doesn't mean they're sexist, or, you know, part of it is simply human nature. Like, we don't know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, literally. Like, I don't know what it's like to live my life in a wheelchair, because I've never lived my life in a wheelchair. That personal experience, I can't know that. But if I have a friend or family member who's in a wheelchair and I'm taking them everywhere all the time, wherever I go, and I have trouble in the movie theater and we have trouble, you start to realize, like, wow, I never knew all the challenges faced by a person in a wheelchair, even just on a practical level of navigating their world. And so it's like, you know, so that's part of the chasm there, is the disconnect. Even the very well-intentioned men, you know, have no idea what's going on a daily basis with women. And how would they know? Unless they really start having these conversations, they can get educated. But it's also, you know, the paradigm is more about like, and you know, women who are frustrated with this have every right to be frustrated. Like, God, you know, I'm tired of having to educate men about women, and I'm tired, you know, go do the work yourself. I've other
Go
stuff
read
to
a
do.
book.
You know, it's like, why do I, you know, and that's valid. And the same with race. It's like, oh God, you know, Black folks have to educate white people about what it's like to be, you know, go school yourself. I don't have time for this. It's too much. It's too much. And so there's a lot of validity to that, you know. But the thing is, even when you get the men in the room who are really willing to show up, want to know what the next step is, are ready to go, they did some homework. Problem is, the current paradigm right now still is in this mode of, you know, even if they don't outright shame the person, like, you're oblivious, you're just another clueless man. Even if they don't do that, it's still not really offering, you know, this again, more powerful invitation to the men, you know. And so I think there's a different conversation that we need to get to right away. I think there's a conversation about gender.
Can a woman engage this conversation, or does it have to be an invitation from another man?
Oh no, that's the thing. I think the trick is, I think the women need to invite the men into the conversation. But the trick is, nobody's psychic, so how do the women know for sure? This guy seems cool, like he kind of gets it. He seems open, but I don't know. Maybe he just seems that way, and really I'm going to sort of really go out on a limb here, and then maybe he's my senior level person, and that's going to have repercussions for me, and I'm getting a promotion, and I don't want to go on a limb. Or maybe I'm senior to him, but in the organization, but still I may think he gets it and he might not really get it. So it's not an exact science, but I think that there's a way for women, or there are ways for women to sort of get a closer and closer read on some male colleagues with whom they have a good rapport, people they like and feel comfortable with, and start that conversation and invite those men and say, you know, there's this work out there around leadership and around gender, and I'm interested. I think it's interesting stuff. And what do you think about that? And, you know, what are your thoughts? And I'd love to engage you in this. And, you know, and even it's interesting because one of the things that happened in one of the recent events I did was, you know, the men were starting to feel like, damned if I do, damned if I don't, or like, I don't even know. I'm trying to learn. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. But then now you're saying I'm too draining to tell you about it. So you're not going to tell me what I'm doing wrong because I have to go educate myself. So now what do I do? It's like I can't win, or, you know, and so I think we have to draw new distinctions, and that's where there's a missing nuance to this conversation as well. In this conversation that we could be having, that we're not having yet, that we need to get to, there's an essential ingredient, which is nuance. And you know, part of that nuance would be, for example, in that case of, well, yes, I am asking you to go educate yourself, because, you know, do some of that work and read some articles, find out about what a lot of women are saying out there on LinkedIn, and don't even have to read a full article. Just, you know, dip your toe in, hear about some of this stuff. Do that much work. But then when it comes to, if this is a woman talking to the man, if it comes to me personally, here's my personal situation in the workplace, and here's my take on it. And I'd love it if you could do X or not do X. Or, when we spoke yesterday, I told 3 of my female colleagues about Dr. Such and Such and how he said X, and I thought it was really because I'm a woman, and it really upset me. But then when I told you about it, instead of just believing me, the first thing you said was, are you sure it was because you're a woman? And maybe not. Or what did he say? What did he say after that? And you kind of interrogated me or questioned me. And really all I needed you to do in that moment was just believe me. So that's that's part of the nuance of this conversation. And that's a simple, concrete thing. Believe. Just believe me. If there's a woman saying to a man, can you just do me a favor and believe me instead of debating me? If I say just believe my experience,
Mm-hmm. Are you finding as you introduce this invitation to the various networks and companies that you're going to, that they're open for this type of conversation?
Well, I think there's unsurprisingly, there's a gamut there, and I think some are, some aren't, some say they are, but they're not really. And then others are feeling like, oh no, we're good. We've got it covered. We did a whole implicit bias training and we're fine. We did implicit bias training. We got this covered. We hired this organization to come in. We've got this. But what's funny is you talk to them 3 months later and it's like, oh yeah, we had this amazing implicit bias training and such group came in and we cried and hugged each other and it was great. And then 3 months later, nothing's changed in the organization. And that's a very common thing.
The reason why I asked JG is because, just the difference in nature between men and women. I know stereotypically, men don't like to talk it all out, right? Typically, they're not necessarily talkers. So I'm just wondering, this invitation to talk, how much of it can they handle?
Right. Well, that's a good point. And I think, again, I'm the exception to the rule because I'm a guy and I fall into some of those male categories really pretty much. I'm a dude. And then other ones, I'm not. Like I talk, I'm a talker, I'm expressive. I'm an artist, I do all. And none of those have to be male or female. But yeah, there are certain things that we have to take into account about. Is it nature or nurture? How much of it is how we're socialized to be men and women and have gender roles fixed, or how much of it is nature, that there's a feminine and a masculine, and in a good positive way, and the positive attributes of the sort of archetypal feminine or masculine. And so these aren't bad things. But in terms of that, the guys who maybe are more quiet or reserved in this, it's not even just an invitation to hash it out and talk and have these long therapy-like sessions. It's really, it's really not. That's really not what the invitation is. It's really, again, going back to really reframing it and having this different paradigm, which is an invitation to build. And not everybody's handy. Not every guy wants to build things, but some guys want to build things. So to leaders and men who love leadership and are interested in leadership, want to be strong. And it's about, hey, come and build this thing. Be strong. Bring all your strength. Be a strong man and come to this table with these strong women and let's build something together. That doesn't mean you have to sit there and talk to them 9 hours a day. It's not even about the verbal part of it. So.
Do you think this type of dialogue is something that can be incorporated into a team meeting? Or is it just too philosophical or just too heavy for a manager to incorporate in their weekly or biweekly team meetings?
See, the problem is you have to know who's on board, because if you go into a team meeting and you don't have buy-in, especially if it's not coming top down, because realistically, for better or for worse, even though innovation can come from all levels of the organization and ideas and teamwork and all that, it's still, in a lot of ways, it's a top-down kind of culture set, that the people who are pulling the levers and who are in charge of, hiring, firing, decision, money, the power players in any organization, they're really still going to set the tone. They're still going to set the tone, the culture of the organization,
Right.
So, and in any given level, mid-level or wherever in the organization, regardless of size, if you don't have enough buy-in from enough of the people in the room, I think it's problematic. Now, I think.
So how do you do that? How do you figure out the buy-in? How do you poll the group to figure out who supports a more dialogue, who wants to co-create, who wants to co-lead among genders?
Right, and I'm not saying I have this exact final answer to that question, but with the approach. Yeah. Well, but one approach, and the approach that I'm really engaged deeply in right now, is this idea of not only is it an invitation as a process, but it's a literal invitation ahead of time. It's literally like we're sending an email out to folks, and we're gonna try to first of all identify leaders who maybe we've seen them talk about this stuff, and those who haven't but who seem open, and then we're gonna really literally send an email saying, hey, we're gonna talk about gender and leadership. We're gonna try to move the needle here. We want to make sure, and then you have to kind of couch it. A lot of times with diversity and inclusion work, folks are forced to kind of water down the message because they're in a position where they have to send it to everybody in the room, everyone in the organization. Right. And they know that they're going to get people resisting and pushback, and they're going to get, so consequently, they have to sort of water it down and make everything non-threatening and just couch it in, okay, we're going to do teamwork and leadership, and oh yeah, by the way, women are pretty cool too. Like you can't, right. you can't come right out and just say, look, we're going to talk about change, right. and really get moving the needle and making it to the point where all the women here in this organization feel completely empowered, and that they're given every opportunity that they need to do their best, and that right. they feel heard and hired and promoted and everything. Right. At some point you have to say it. And so then you're going to get people in the organization. And unfortunately, if it's the higher up people in the organization, it's a tougher hill to climb. But if you get people grumbling and grousing at the lower levels, that's less of a challenge, because if you get more buy-in from the top, they're going to go ahead and do it anyway. Look, we're doing this. And there's a certain boldness, and that goes back into more of the stereotypical thing of men wanting to be strong and that idea of strength. But it's really an appeal. Instead of saying to the top people like, hey, stop screwing up, stop being so dumb, stop being so clueless and sexist and everything and backwards and it's like, hey, be bold, be innovative. Are you bold? Are you bold enough to make this change? Right. Show me you're bold. Step up.
Show me you're bold.
And that's also. Sorry, what's that?
I said, yeah, show me you're bold.
And not in a sort of daring way, like I dare you, if you're so tough, step. Not in that macho kind of way, but really still with the spirit of an invitation. Like, hey, look, you're interested in bold leadership, right? You're interested in creativity and innovation and how we get to the next level in 21st century leadership. You want to be this strong, bold leader. Well, one of the ways to be a strong, bold leader is to figure out where we're going and what's the next level of this, So yeah, it's uncharted territory. So stepping up to this is a bold move.
Yeah, I agree. JG, I wanted to say thank you for stopping by today to talk about how we can take gender equality to the next level. But unfortunately, we've reached the end of the show. But before we go, I would want you to take some time and tell the community how they can follow you and your work.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And obviously, as you can tell, I'm really passionate. Thanks. And I'm passionate about this work, obviously. My website is Bring Your Strength, altogether, just bringyourstrength.com. And that's the title of the book. It's on Amazon too. It's just a little pocket book that has this framework in it. But that's clickable through the website. So it's bringyourstrength.com. And then also on LinkedIn. If you look me up on LinkedIn, it's JG Boccella, which is J period G period, and then my name, B as in boy, Occella. Just look me up on LinkedIn and get in touch that way as well. But thank you for that. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.